Hi and welcome to another video by Are You Arty Kids. In this video we're going to look at basic watercolour techniques. So got a little pad watercolours here, a couple of different brushes. Now remember that brushes do different things. These are not expensive brushes I'm working with here. This is a number 10 and this is synthetic, but it's a good point brush which is useful for detail. And this one is a number 8. And this is a coarse flathead brush that is quite useful for paint techniques, but also for backgrounds and bigger areas, more coarse work. Okay, so always using the right brush for the right job. Making sure whatever palette to mix in you are using is clean. So this is a white lid of a paint tin, and obviously because paints are transparent to a degree, it's always good to mix on a white surface so that you are not contaminating or tainting the colour you're mixing. So you can see that luminance coming through from the white. Keeps your paints clean, and just a tissue or a rag, obviously to moderate the capillary action that forms when you work with a brush. Remember that soaks up all the paint and water, so you can get quite a lot in there, and this moderates how much paint and water comes off this surface by using it on the rag, and obviously mops up spillages, etc, etc. So let's start with a basic one. So it doesn't matter what colour you use, so I'm just going to unlock the colour. Now remember, because these paints, I've just cleaned these, but remember these start dry, so you do have to work your brush into the paint to unlock that rich colour if you're looking for a rich colour. So I'm just going to use a blue, so I'm going to put my tip of my brush in there. I'm going to really wiggle it around. There we go. And I want that single cream sort of consistency. I want a nice rich colour, so I am going to put that straight down onto my paper. There we go. And I get a nice rich colour. Okay, so a little bit more water. If I use the tip of the brush, I can get a nice thin line, so I can just do some little experiments, some flicks, nice natural flicks. Or press the brush further down, so you can see I'm holding the brush further up than the metal, so I can see I've got that full visibility. I can rest my hand on there if I need to, or I can, like I have been doing, floating across. I find it easier to work down rather than working away like that, so it's easier to work down. Okay, so you want a nice rich colour, and what I'm trying to get is a nice clean edge. Yeah, okay. So that little technique there, I'm going to call that wet on dry. Dry paper and a wet paint mix. Okay, so we get a nice rich colour. The only disadvantage is that's going to soak straight into the paper as soon as it hits it. This isn't watercolour board, this is just a cartridge, a lightweight cartridge. If we over wet it, it's going to break down, it's also going to ripple. Okay, and as soon as that hits there, a little bit difficult to smooth out and move. If you're doing a big area, you'd get lots of brush strokes that you may well not want. Okay, so zoom out a little bit. So this time what I'm going to do is, with clean water, is I'm just going to put a little bit of water down first. So this is wet water, and then I've got my colour. There we go, and I put my colour down on there. So you can see that it's not as rich saturation wise as this one, however it does move around a lot easier. Now this is because of the water that I've put down first. It allows, like an ice skater on an ice rink, it glides across that ice rink, yeah, rather than hitting it straight away and sticking. So if we're using big areas like skies or beaches or background landscapes or washes, so background where we're building up with lighter tones first, we could use this technique. And this is what we would refer to as wet on wet. So putting that water down first and then putting our wet paint mix on top allows it to be wash, and also removes any brush strokes if we were doing a large area. Okay, so wet on wet. Let's just move it down a little bit. There we go. This one now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to dry my brush, take a lot of the excess water off. I'm going to go into a paint that isn't as watery, so it's not got a puddle of water in there. And put that in there. So there's a little bit of moisture on this blue, but I've taken all the moisture out of the brush and there's no water on the paper. So you're getting this very drag effect, very fragmented. Look at what it does to the brush. Yeah, very drag effect. And this one is what we would refer to as dry on dry technique. So pretty much a dry mix, hardly any moisture at all on there, no moisture on the paper, and we get a nice texture, useful for, think of all the different things that would be textured in real world scenario. And we could obviously we're just doing this with single colour at the moment. Okay, so let's try something else. Let's try a blend, a fade, or sort of a vignette as such. So what we're going to do now is we're going to find a strip of paper, and we're going to put a bit of water down on a long strip, and we're going to put some nice rich colour at one end up here. I'm going to wash that off straight away. I'm going to dry my brush, and then I'm going to pull that down. Okay, so nice rich colour at the top, wash my brush, and then pull that down. Now, I've got to be careful with this. As I say, this isn't watercolour board, so I'm just showing you on material that most people have at home, cartridge paper. So you can see I've got a fade, and I could take that all the way down by just keeping washing my brush at each stage, so I'm not picking up any new colour, and I could fade that down as far as I could. Yeah, but I've got this sort of like bleed stain that comes down, and it's nice and smooth. Just got to be careful the paper fibres don't break down if I over wet it or if I over rub that on this cheap paper. Okay, so I've got a fade. Let's just label that up. Fade, or you could call it a blend, dark to light, or you could call it a vignette. Okay, and we can do that, and we can even mix different colours that go together on the colour wheel, next door neighbour colours that have a relationship, naturally blend well together. So let's just have a look at our palette here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some water down. I would clean my water normally. Once it starts to go a bit tainted, I'm going to go into my orange. I'm going to put a nice blob of rich orange at the top. You can see already that orange is bleeding down on its own. And then I'm going to go to my yellow, really give that a good mix, put that on the bottom, dry my brush, I'm going to move that yellow, yeah, and I can blend that, so I can do that again, do it with a red, I can even do that into an orange, top to bottom, and blend that one up. So any colour that has a natural relationship with each other tend to blend quite easily. Colours that are next door neighbours on the colour wheel. So just put a little strip there. Put a little bit of green. A little bit of blue at that top end. Yeah, and that blue into green looks quite nice. Yeah, so we've got this two colour blend, top to bottom, blending in the middle, which looks quite nice on there. Okay. Other little things we can look at. We can look at using your rag even, and put this little tip into slightly damp paint, and we could scumble. Yeah, we can put paint onto the surface, or we can even use that technique to actually remove paint. So let's just see if we can get that working. Let's put a little bit of water there. Bit of blue, and then we can actually soften this. It will blend, also adds texture, and it will also pull paint off as well. And I could actually add layers onto this with different colours and use that as a painting technique for different elements. Okay. So those are some of our very, very basic watercolour techniques, which will help you get started, and other little things you can practice if you're new to painting or to watercolour, just to get your control, is maybe just painting some simple geometric shapes. So just trying to get a really rich, simple shape. So you could try and paint a triangle, block in, and just try and use the tip for the corners. Remember to turn your book or your paper around if it's more comfortable. Don't always paint from one angle. Just using the tip, using that for control. So if you were painting a triangle and you've got a bit of a wobbly hand, rest your hand on the paper, get that visibility, and then paint downwards and out. Paint out to the edge or down, and then twist it over. And you can use this point because you can get a fine line. Use the point to flick that up, and if you go out the line like that, you can just make it bigger. And you can always build this up by adding extra coats of paint if you need to, for richness and saturation of colour. And you can get some little shapes, and that will help you practice. Another little thing you could do, if you wanted to extend your colour palette, you could use something called tints. So if we go, and you can practice your skills with this, see how far you can get. So I'm just going to do a pure red, and then you can just see my paints there. So a couple of ways you could do it. You could either add the red to the white or white to the red. So if I wanted to add a little bit of red to my white, we get a tint of red. And I could take that all the way down, getting lighter and lighter, and see how many steps I could get. So basically, if you add white to any colour, I should do pure blue, and I add white to it, I get a tint. So colour plus white equals tint. Okay, so that's another one. You could extend your colour palette this way if you had limited colours or you were doing variations. And if you wanted to go darker, what we would do is we would take our pure colour at one end, and this time, instead of adding white, we are going to add black. So probably doesn't pick it up very well on the camera, but what I've done is I've added black to my blue, or you could do it the other way around. You could add blue to your black, depending on the severity of what you wanted, and you will extend that colour in the opposite direction. So if we do green, so you can see, pure green, add black to my green, and I get this very cold green. Because if you imagine in real world, you have got, say if we're just thinking about greens and you're painting landscapes, trees, bushes, grass, it's not just one green in the world, or perception of green. We've got cold greens, bluey greens, yellowy greens. So we can get lots of variations. And this is called, if we do this with any colour, a shade. So colour plus black equals a shade of that colour. Okay, a shade of that colour. And there is something else. Another little variation of that theory is you can actually make tones. So if I mix up a grey, so if I just zoom out, there we go. So a variation of that is mixing something called tones. So I've just added black to my white to make a grey, and then if I add grey to a colour, so I'm just going to start with pure red up here. Well, I just dirtied it. I've already got a tone of red. Let's start with a different colour. Let's start with orange. There we go, pure orange. And then add a grey to it. I get a tone of orange. There we go. So tint shades and tones. So to get a tone of a colour, we would add grey. So that is grey plus colour equals tone. There we go.